Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Going to be sticking with solar for one more week, partially because I'm going to be speaking at Solar and Storage Live in the coming days in London, but also because, as you well know, it's one of my first passions in the cleantech sector. But again, looking at a different part of the value chain this week, as I speak to David Trainavvicius, who is the CEO and founder of two solar companies, at least in PVCase and Detra Solar. PVCase in particular, probably most people will have heard of so far. But David, firstly, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you with us at last.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time.
So much traveling going on at the moment, and so much obviously born from the success of PVCase. I was just trying to think of when we first met or interacted a good many years ago, when the world was a very different place. Both from a solar perspective and obviously from the business perspective. So at that time, PVCase was still very much in its infancy, and I guess dominant market softwares like PVCase had been around for a long time, but clearly hadn't evolved too much. Now you clearly saw an opportunity there. Perhaps you can share a little bit. Firstly, we'll dig in a few more minutes, but firstly, you can just show us a little bit what PVCase is and what it's all about and what the solution and offering is that you have.
So I think, definitely when we met first time, it was, my guess, 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe.
At least, I think, yeah.
When PVCase was just born. So it was completely different game at that point. We've been focusing on one product company, quite small, focusing more on like a European market. And now it became way bigger. So we have multi-products. We are serving industrial and commercial rooftop space also. Although we started with utility scale power plant design tools. So now we are becoming from the few product team to the multi-product platform, serving clients from 80 different countries, with employees also from now based in Europe, in the US, almost 300 in total. So it's changed a lot. Definitely different challenges, different market challenges also along the way, but really exciting journey so far.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite some rapid growth, and there's a lot that we'll talk through, both from scaling from, as you say, a handful of people to 300 and the challenges that brings. Clearly fundraising two significant rounds, the most recent, the B round, 100 million, a mega round, which was outstanding. And as you say, that international growth. Perhaps we can start though with a little bit of the genesis of the company, because also you founded Detra Solar, another client that we've had the pleasure of working with. Perhaps you can share how those entities came about, and more specifically, how did PVCase come about, and what led you to sort of found and then create this platform that's gone through that growth?
Yep, of course. So I founded and was running Detra Solar for I would say since 2011 until 2018, so 7 years. The company grew quite a bit. We did a lot project designs, mostly in northern part of Europe. I think at that point we designed over 10 gigawatts of solar projects.
Right.
But if you remember, you've been in solar for a long time, so now we have this like a mega project where you're adding 100 or 200 megawatts. At that time was 1 megawatt, 5 megawatts, 10 max. It meant that we had done so many projects for so many different developers. And at one point we decided to create a software and use that software in-house that could speed up some of the engineering processes. It was really manual labor. It was taking so many hours to do those projects, especially in the detail engineering space. So we started automating some of them. And this is how PVCase was born. So I think we spent maybe a year developing that in-house, started using that in-house, and it was noticed by our clients because all of them were looking for a similar software solution, what was not available in the market.
Yeah.
So they asked David if you can sell that software to us. So this is how that new revenue stream came about. And then in the end, it was a full spin-off from Detra Solar to a new entity, PVCase, in 2018.
Yeah, it's quite a leap to do that, because Detra was and still is, of course, a very successful solar design house and doing exceptionally well. But to then, as you say, spin out a product and to really see it fly in the way that it has. What were some of the dynamics at that time? It seems only like it's just say 4 or 5 years ago, but it feels like a million years ago in solar years, so to speak. So, what were some of the challenges, and what was the feedback that you were getting from the marketplace that encouraged you to develop the product further and to see it as an opportunity to be a standalone business?
From day one, we decided to be a bit different. Software engineering company for several different angles. First was putting our clients as in a spotlight, meaning that working with them closely to understand their needs. And I think that's the why many software companies are being challenged if they do differently, if they develop the software that they think that clients will buy and then actually nobody is buying. So we take a bit different approach that we spend a lot of time with our clients actually, in person to understand how they use our software and how we can improve that. In the first couple of quarters, I would say, we managed to close one of the several actually biggest clients in Europe that kind of proved that we're on the right track. And then when you have these case studies with these big clients, it's much easier, let's say, to sell to the others. So it was a good sign for us that we are, doing it right. And also internally, we had this idea that, so it was 2018, so different market in VC world at that point was, burn money, spend as much as possible for growth. We took also a bit different approach. We said, we want to build a sustainable business, not being in sustainable energy field, but sustainable business in a way that it generates profit. And we've been profitable from first month of operations, and we've been always profitable. So we don't need to chase the money. We don't need to rely on investors. We don't need to look at, VC market, and in the last years, it changed quite a bit. So I think we've been from day one, we've been taking a bit different approach that ended up being really successful.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, David, because as you well know, that the sort of the funding landscape has changed quite significantly, over the last few years and in the last year or so in particular. And now there's much more focus clearly on companies who have traction, who have some revenues, and there's much less appetite, of course, for those companies who are burning cash. How did you, to do that initially? It must be tempting sometimes when, the first round was a decent size, of course, but so it must be tempting to sort of go all guns blazing and spend that cash. There's a lot of people that do that and obviously come unstuck a little bit with that, but you maintained that, which led to the fact that this mega round that you followed on with was, I guess, easier. Because one of the things that always came across from our conversations and watching what was happening at PVCase is you were never like most startups, always pitching, always chasing the money, so to speak. So I guess obviously having the profitability helps, but it's interesting that you made a conscious decision to do that when so many founders will have the money and look to deploy that as quickly as possible.
I think it also depends in which sector you're operating, and are you after enterprise clients or B2C sector? So if you're in B2C, then yeah, of course, it takes more capital to actually close clients. When in our case, if you have a good traction, plus the industry was growing 30-40% year over year, then that helps a lot.
Yeah.
But in general, because we're in this B2B SaaS sector only, and our clients, most of them are big enterprise clients, so they are paying for the software upfront, meaning that we are collecting more cash for growth. So when we raised Series A round a couple of years ago, I think it was 23 million at that point. The idea was to accelerate product development that we did. So we became from one product now to 5.
Yeah.
But we never spent that money also because the traction and the growth was so fast that we couldn't spend enough money. And it's like we had this idea that we need to hire only the best talent. And that means that the hiring process is a bit longer and slower. And the biggest expense, in SaaS business naturally is people. So So you cannot hire that fast to deploy all that capital that you just received.
Yeah. But it's a good thing. I'm going to move on to the people side because I know that's very important to you, and you've got a great team, a growing one around the world now. But going back to the early stage when you obviously founded an engineering and a services business, and clearly did that for some time and had that mindset of having a solutions and an engineering business to then go into a SaaS business, which is clearly, although they effectively were born out of the same thing, they're very different businesses to run. I mean, firstly, how did you adapt to that, and which do you prefer? I'm guessing PVCase because you've obviously very much led on that side. But how did you find that transition from running and building a services business to a SaaS business with the pros and cons of doing that?
Great question. It's a completely different mindset, I would say, and it took me a while to adapt to that, maybe a year or two. And it's several different layers. So the first would be the pace of the growth. So Detra Solar was always growing really fast. I would say maybe 50 to 100% per year, so almost doubling. Where PVCase, I think in the first years we've been like 4 times growth year over year. So it was just handling that operationally and understanding what works and how fast you need to make decisions to adapt was like mind blowing in the beginning. And the second one is that just understanding the client in a bit different way. So in service or consultancy, it's a lot on relationship building, especially for the founders or C-levels, because that sells the most. And then when you need to deliver those projects, so you're relying a lot on your engineering capacity, meaning you cannot sell too much because you don't have that much capacity in the engineering department. So it's always that balance, how to play that correctly and when to hire in these different departments. So I used to spend a lot of time thinking about it and modeling. Where in the SaaS business and PV cases, you can sell as much as you can or as you want, and then you're just delivering new features or new products in the background. So it's a bit different dynamics. That I really enjoying what we're doing now. It's I can say that being in this high growth pace, you'll never get bored. It's always new challenges every day, week, month, and that's exciting.
Well, what have some of those been? Because as you say, there's always, in any startup or founding situation, there's always a lot of plates that you're spinning. But hypergrowth I've always found interesting. I was blessed for a short period of time. My solar business did triple-digit growth, and that was super hard to deal with. But so when you start to really excel, like you have with PVCase, what were some of the challenges that perhaps maybe surprised you, or just the ones that kept you maybe awake at night the most during that consistent growth over the last few years?
Mm-hmm. Probably team composition on restructuring. So when you start, you have the founding team that kind of wears many hats. And then half a year later or 1 year later, you need to give those hats to different people. So hiring new leadership team members that can help with splitting those responsibilities and how to grow those departments, and also thinking about not only what you need now but what you will need in 1 or 2 years. So that dynamic of what type of people, experience and seniority you need to have at a specific time of your growth was the biggest challenge. Like thinking about that a lot and reading a lot about it.
Yeah. Picking up on that, because that's something we had some experience. We were blessed to hire a couple of great people for you. But what struck me at the time was, again, you were super diligent about those people. Now, of course, we always encourage that, but probably to a greater level, because when there's the hyper growth, there's money in the bank, there's fast growth. It can be tempting sometimes not to rush things overly, but certainly we've seen companies in the past, and I spoke to somebody this week. I clearly won't mention who, but in that situation, they made a hire, but didn't really do the level of due diligence and the level of clarification that they could or should have done, just because they needed the person, right? They needed that function filled. So again, it must be tempting sometimes when you just need someone to do a job. And yet you guys were very rigid in saying, no, it has to be this culture, this skill set, this experience. And obviously some of those things, like you say, are taking longer than perhaps you would ideally want, or certainly that other people wouldn't have the patience for. And that's holding your nerve a little bit when there's so much growth going on.
Yeah, 100%. So each time that you're not delivering or not hiring people fast enough, it means that the other group of people need to cover for him or for her. And you remember and thank you for all the hires that you brought to PVCase, excellent talent. But we had this joke with you and your team about we're actually looking for those unicorns. We need these specific requirements, and it took us way longer than anyone wanted. But in the end, now we are probably a couple of years later that we are super happy that those people are still staying and driving the growth. I think it's sometimes you need to sacrifice certain things for the future growth, and this is the path we actually took.
Yeah, the reward for the patience, which is, patience is hard to come by when things are going so fast and so well. But it's great to that. Let's talk a little bit about culture, because again, we obviously had the pleasure of working with you. I always see the guys at the various trade shows that we're exhibiting at, and have kept in touch with the people that we put into PVCase. The culture you have is fantastic, and that's again something that's really tough to maintain as you scale. To make sure that everybody who comes in not only has the right skill sets, but buys into the values and becomes the role model for the next hire behind them, which may only be another months, let alone years. How would you describe the culture, and how much effort has it been to maintain it during that growth?
So I can actually pick up on your last question out about having certain criteria on the hiring plan and having that a good cultural fit in the beginning. So we always try to hire managers first for them to build the teams under them. So if you have a great talent in that manager level, you kind of trust them to cascade that culture that we have, and that was working successfully until now. It's getting harder, I would say, when the teams are now spread out through different locations and different countries, because not in each location or each country you have that manager that kind of builds that culture around. So we're trying to kind of hack that a bit with, as you mentioned, going to the events together and actually bringing senior people to those events, to the main ones, to meet people, to be with them, go for drinks, dinners after, and just spend time in person. It was a huge challenge during COVID, but I think everyone just used to work remote. But now when doors are open, everyone is just like waiting for those events. We're doing actually in a week or so, we're doing a birthday party in Lithuania, so flying in all the people here. We do one summer camp during summer or end of summer, where a lot of people also flying in, and we do a Christmas party, and then all those events in between. So although we sit in different offices and different locations, but we meet each other, not all of us, but most of us, we are meeting in person quite often. Some of the guys doing these workshops in different work groups. So if they work on like integration or marketing or rebranding or any like related to different work group, they're actually coming in person in different locations to spend some time together.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so important, and one of the challenges any business, clients have found, and ourselves, although we're only spread across a few countries, but again, we get together on a quarterly basis, at least to try and spend some time together, and at the various events that we attend. So there's huge advantages, of course, to remote working in terms of access to talent, and of course from international expansion point of view. But it certainly raises those challenges of how do you keep avoiding any silos or cliques or any kind of disruptions to the to the culture, and it's always good to see on Instagram or wherever the team's getting together and doing some fun stuff together. That's something which clearly comes from you as the founder, but also those early team members you've mentioned. And some of those early hires are still with you, still doing well. So that's I guess raised or sort of eased the burden a little bit on yourself to make sure that you're not the only person that's leading on this culture front. That you have a very consistent and a very solid management and leadership team that are supporting both the growth from a practical point of view, but also from a cultural point of view.
Yep, yeah, 100%. From day one, we said that actually my idea was what I mentioned about this different heads of different departments, that I was trying to pitch this idea that your department is your own company and you're responsible for that, meaning that they are taking so much responsibility or work from myself. And this is very scalable model, because now when we have different streams, different work groups, different departments, great managers are leading those departments on, as you said, growth and cultural level as well. So it's a high trust kind of environment that we have.
Right. Yeah, no, trust is always a critical factor, as I often talk about. Let's look a bit about where you are in the solar industry, because all of us who are founders at some point think we're going to do something disruptive. And many companies do great innovative things. We've got some brilliant clients doing great stuff. But it's not so often you get something which really shakes up a marketplace. Now, solar, of course, was going reasonably strong back in the day when you started and when I started, but it's nothing compared to how it is now in terms of the sector scale. But you took on an incumbent, a very well-established incumbent, and have completely changed the market in a relatively short period of time. How would you share some thoughts on disrupting incumbents in markets? What led you first of all to see that there was this opportunity, and then how did you particularly address the fact that there was already a very well-established player there?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So the first the mindset on the product development that we had from day one was that focus on client first, and then try to identify patterns in different locations, how projects are being designed. So then we don't need to have different versions for Japan, Brazil, UK, in different countries. So we managed to find this thin line. And now when we are presenting the software solution to any of those 80 countries that we are selling to now, they all say, oh, we're actually designing this in a really similar manner. So for them, it's really relatively easy to adapt and change the way how they work using PVCase software suites. And this, when you're selling one product, is quite challenging. So we said we need to be close to the client and close to the client processes to understand how they work and optimize those processes. Meaning that if you're really deep in those enterprises, and in those enterprises are starting using your software solution, not in the headquarters, but also in different locations that they have offices and engineering power, the tool, that was our assumption, the tool should become a standard in the industry. And it became 2 years ago. We started seeing that they implementing cross departments, cross countries. They started printing these books, how utility scale solar is designed using PVCase. And they're giving to new people when they are joining those companies. That was amazing to see. So I think that it was not easy, but I think we found the way how to win the market. In general, when I look at solar engineering space, it's still engineering. I still call it a bit like old school engineering that had to be disrupted. So we said, okay, so let's create tools that will be more suited for the current user base, but also for the future users or future generation users that they now like, you know, social media, iPhone, and like all these nice looking platforms, and they're using a lot. So how we can make that engineering a bit more adaptable, or even like looking better, because all the engineering tools, like in general, they look not great.
Yeah.
Let's call it. So we said how we can change that, the feel and look, to make it more up to date. So I think that was the big part of the success also.
Yeah. It must have also been quite advantageous in many ways that the evolution or the genesis of the company came from effectively you were your customer, essentially.
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
you had all of those years of learning in terms of what the customer needs and how it thinks.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the first competitors that we had. I used their software when I was at Detra Solar, and I was always thinking why they are so difficult to use, why they are so complicated, why the process how you're designing is not adapted to the new technologies that are being in the market. It was like it was obvious that something can be done better,
Yeah.
and I think we kind of succeeded to do so.
Looking at the overall solar market, I should say back in when you started, both not clearly from a cost perspective, things were very, very different, but also, back when I started, people were still talking about megawatts, not gigawatts. And now we're pushing towards, terawatts of solar being installed on an annual basis. How do you see, and what are your sort of hopes for the solar industry over the next 3, 4, 5 years?
So myself, I started in 2009. Solar modules were 165 watts. Probably you also remember. So I see this growth is, it's not only like the growth of the market, but also on the technology side. Now it's a big trend of like repowering power plants. Some of the PV modules now are 800 watts. So the increase is massive. So I think it's a lot of opportunity there. But when I started 15 years ago now, it used to be really difficult case for industrial users to understand why they need solar. So it was highly subsidized. It was completely different game. So it was more, I'm always saying this, it was more nice to have. And 15 years later, we're sitting here and solar is must to have because of so many different changes in technology, in prices of tech in general, probably dropped by 90%. So investment cases are now real. So everyone is looking not at the subsidies as an investment line, but more as the ROI of that project.
And do you see, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and additionally, it's a big push from the governments as well. So we've seen,
Right.
U.S., Europe, now with the unfortunate war, what's happening in Ukraine, it's everyone started speaking more about energy independence, and I think renewables is a good catalyst to actually make it happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Looking at, because you have products that deal with both, I'm really interested in, utility scale has grown enormously, and you touched on the very beginning, the size of some of the solar parks now is enormous. But having started in the C&I market from solar, I've always been surprised a little bit how long it's taken for the C&I, for the rooftop, big rooftops to have caught up, if you like, with utility scale. Not in terms of specific size, but just in terms of the traction in the marketplace. But are you seeing much more now, given some of those factors you talked about, on-site usage, energy security, cost reductions, investment cases, etc.? Are you starting to see there's as much call for the C&I model, for the rooftop model, as there is for the utility scale, or where do you see the majority of the interest in the product and in what you're doing?
Mm-hmm. I think still majority is the utility scale, but the reason why we launched the commercial industrial rooftop design tool now was of the demand from the clients. So most of them started doing this hybrid projects or different type of projects. So utility plus C&I or plus battery storage or wind. So it's becoming a bit more complex. And each country, each developer, each investor, they have their KPIs, how many megawatts or gigawatts now they need to deploy per year. And I think they all understand that, yes, utility scale is, let's call it easier, because then you can install 500 megawatts and it's easier to achieve those targets. But it takes such a long time to actually deliver that project. So meanwhile, when that project is being developed or built, they started working on the rooftop designs also and rooftop installations. So it became obvious for most of the players that they need to do this combination of different type of projects to achieve those targets. And I think it's a good, at least this is what we are seeing in the last couple of years, let's say.
Yeah, no, it's great to see those big roofs. I think way back in 2011, 2012, our biggest rooftop was 0.5 meg, which we were very proud of at the time. But now that's dwarfed by the kind of roofs that are going in now, which is cool to see. Now, you've again, the company has been growing substantially. Was it just last week that you won the BNEF Pioneer Award?
Yes, I'm very proud about that.
Yeah, and that was again testament to the disruption that you've brought to the marketplace and the part that your company plays in the important growth of solar and renewables broadly. But there must be nice to have received that and to have that accolade amongst many that you've had so far.
Yeah, definitely. In the last couple of years, we received quite a few different awards, like Startup of the Year, highest growth companies in Baltics and in top 100 in Europe. But BNEF, for me personally, was that North Star that we've been kind of trying to get when we started. But what I like about them, they are taking a bit different approach. So it's not how you're performing in the first year, but it's like a several year process, and also what are the biggest challenges that company is solving. So I think having that award was something special for me and the team also.
And for the team, yeah, no, congratulations on that. Did I hear you say before, David, that it was you're having a birthday party coming up? What year is that?
So it'll be 6th year birthday party happening the beginning of next month.
Very good, very good. At Hyperion, we always tend to have our birthday party because I founded the company in July, and we're 10 years old this year, and we tend to coordinate that with a trip to Intersolar and a few trips to the beer garden. So, but we'll certainly see you in Intersolar, I'm sure. But again, from the audience perspective, we'll show some links to the various platforms where you can catch up on David and PVCase for more information. And as I say, if you're at pretty much any trade show, he or one of the team, we're bound to be present, solar related trade show, certainly Intersolar, there'll be, I'm sure, a good presence from you guys. But David, it's been great to share some of your journey with us. Thanks for taking the time out. Good to have you a little bit of time at home after all your travels recently. But yeah, great story, great team, and thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you, David. Pleasure, as always. Happy to be in the show finally.